Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm happy that you can join me in connecting with photographers and entrepreneurs as we discuss photography, business, and that sometimes messy thing we call life. This podcast is brought to you by Milu, the simplest way for photographers and coordinators to collaborate on shot lists and timelines for weddings, parties, and other amazing events. Visit Milu, MIILU.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another Bokeh Podcast episode, a brand new guest, certainly a new topic. As I was saying to Vince before we started recording, this is kind of a departure for us, a different type or a different genre of photographer on the show today. But I'm joined by Vince Sirico. Vince, thank you so much for making time for the Bokeh Podcast community.
Yeah, thank you so much. Honestly, I'm excited to be here.
Well, and we connected, I guess, initially and virtually 2 or 3 months ago at least. It's been a little bit. I'm excited that we finally get to make this happen. But I have to say right off the bat, too, that a lot of the impetus really for doing this show today is your work, the uniqueness of your work, the quality of your work. And so I'm going to go ahead and tell everybody who is listening in, if you want to go to vincesirico.com, it's VINCESIRICO.com. And the same thing on Instagram. We're going to, of course, link to these in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. But you can check out Vince's work. We're going to actually talk today about how to get started in apparel photography and more specifically shoes, because I know, Vince, that's particularly a passion of yours.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about your backstory, but then how you've ultimately made the move very, very quickly in your career to working with companies like Reebok and Adidas, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's a dream come true, honestly. So
well, and I have to say too, my son in particular is I don't even know what the correct phrase is here, but a fan of apparel and shoes. And so I was like,
there we go.
You gotta look at this guy's Instagram account and check out his work, whatever.
I'm gonna have to get his shoe size.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
but we're gonna get to both your career and kind of how you've gotten where you've gotten in just a little bit. Let's start as we normally do at the podcast with a question about your brand position. Now, this is an interesting one because normally I'm having wedding and portrait photographers on the show, and more than ever, it's really important to have a distinct brand position. Of course, this is the unique value proposition that your brand brings to your market. Now, you're in it's somewhat of a similar situation in that there are maybe not as many apparel or shoe photographers in the market, but it's highly competitive. So I'm curious, what is your photography business's brand position? How do you set yourself apart from the other apparel photographers?
Yeah, so I always think about it, and it comes down to footwear and kind of apparel actually came first to me before photography. I've been passionate kind of about that whole world a lot longer before I discovered photography. And I think that shows through the work that it's always going to be and always has been about footwear. You know, I've never really deleted any Instagram posts. So if you scroll all the way to the very bottom, you're going to start seeing really bad, iPhone photos of me holding them in my hands like sneakers, or I'm wearing them to school.
Okay.
So it's always been about that. And I think that passion, over time has been able to show through my work.
Interesting. So you would say then that not only your passion, but ultimately your understanding of the footwear world. And again, forgive me if I'm not using the correct language here.
No, it's fine.
that kind of drives what you're able to bring to the market?
Yes. I think, and it's not for all other photographers, but I think a lot of other ones that maybe jump into footwear photography possibly got started in photography, maybe shooting something else, maybe it was like they're interested in landscape or music photography. And along the way, sneakers has definitely became a little bit of a trend, a little mainstream now, which is cool to see. At one point in time, it wasn't, so it was it's wild to watch it kind of ebb and flow. But yeah, it's always been sneakers for me, and it always kind of will be.
So I have to ask, do you collect sneakers yourself?
Yeah, I would say it's not like a trading card thing almost per se.
Okay.
It used to be like that pretty bad. But now that I'm in the New York area apartment space isn't the biggest, so I don't have much control over that. But I do have a lot of sneakers, I will say. I have some here, and then I have some back home where my family is in Chicago.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's pretty cool. Well, would you say that New York is kind of the hub for apparel photography, more specifically footwear photography? And do you find, I mean, again, in the wedding and portrait photography world, there are hundreds or even thousands of photographers almost within an arm's reach all the time. How crowded is that photography market where you're at?
Yeah, I think it actually is, I think, pretty crowded, especially New York. I think New York is one of the hubs, one of the main cities, I would say. Between here and LA, you're going to see the most in terms of like fashion and footwear. And then you obviously have Portland and the Oregon area where a lot of these companies are based out of, some of the main ones. So you have, agencies there that have their own in-house photographers too, that you're working alongside, or I guess working against, if you look at it that way.
Sure.
So yeah, I think it is crowded, but I will say everybody does have their own specialty. I don't think there's two like photographers that are too similar to each other. So everyone does, get hired for a certain reason.
And just to kind of bring it back to that brand position question one more time, how do you, you talk about the significance of your background, your passion for shoes, and how that came before you even got into photography. But how do you ultimately, and I know we're going to talk about your career and how you got to where you've gotten now, but just in regards to brand position, how do you effectively communicate what it is that you have to offer to a company effectively versus or in comparison, in contrast to the other shoe photographers?
Yeah. So I guess that's something where I think if you go on my website or even Instagram, there's not a whole lot of copy about my work.
Yeah.
It's I just want the fit to be right, where if someone was to go on there and see my work, they just want to get that with
Makes sense.
Their product.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think I try and do my best to just let the work speak for itself. I'm not the most outgoing person. I don't do a lot of like cold emails and stuff. I'm trying to get work. I'm not in that sense of a hustler. So I've just really been big on doing work, even sometimes if it's just going out and creating the work for myself with shoes I have or something, and just trying to let that work speak for itself. And hopefully it'll fall into the right hands. And so far it has, and I really do enjoy that process.
Interesting. That's an interesting take. And again, I don't know if it would work as effectively in the wedding portrait photography world, because it feels like wedding and portrait photographers are kind of a dime a dozen. But I have to say again that your work does speak for itself. It does have a unique feel. Something I didn't mention to you before, when you and I had kind of briefly gone back and forth before, I had mentioned the significance of color, and we'll talk more about that in just a bit.
Yeah.
But it seems like much, if not most, of your work happens with an environmental background. You're actually photographing the shoe in an environment as opposed to the studio, which I really love as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I've tried the studio route a couple times, and it's just, I don't think it's for me. There was the big hump of just trying to, learning lights and everything. That was something that I really wanted to tackle.
Yeah. Because
it bothered me just not knowing it. And in the beginning, it was ignorance, saying I didn't need to know it, but, I just wanted to get past that and learn it. And now that I've learned it, I really do believe I belong like kind of outside in the environment with natural light and all of that. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, talk to me about your experience as a business owner. You've not been doing this an incredibly long time. And in fact, you moved to New York City right after school and jumped kind of right into freelancing. But how long have you been photographing professionally?
Yeah. So it's been probably 5 or 6 years now.
Okay.
I was doing a lot of freelance work while I was in school. It kind of became my college job. Because I did not like having a regular job. It drove me crazy.
Yep, I get it.
Yeah. So it started very early in college. I want to say my sophomore year is when I kind of figured out that photography was what I wanted to do. And it was right from the jump, footwear photography. And so this actually 2019 itself is the first actually entire year where I've just been completely freelance by myself, not kind of attached or doing anything else.
Okay.
And it couldn't be going better. So it's been amazing so far.
Well, I'm stoked for you. That's exciting to hear.
Thank you.
I'd be curious too to hear what what the biggest lesson that you've learned so far is as a professional photographer. Like what would be, I know your career is relatively short so far, but you've got a great launch. What's one of the biggest lessons that you've learned that you'd want to share with a fellow photographer?
Just to be incredibly patient. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think it's going to come over time as well.
Okay.
There was a time when I was trying to get into the footwear industry. I knew I wanted to be in it and around it and with product, and I didn't know what that was really. So it started off with me wanting to be a footwear designer. And I went to art school and it just didn't work out. I couldn't draw to save my life. Yeah. So, but I took a photo class while I was in art school because they have all of these, crazy classes you can take. And I had to get a camera and it kind of went from there. But during that whole process, I just remember being up super late at night on YouTube and all of that, trying to find an answer or even a school degree that had something to do with the footwear industry. And I think that developed some serious patience because I didn't know anybody in the industry to talk to. So it was kind of just me and my computer. So you can develop that patience, I think it's crucial, whether you're waiting for an invoice or another gig or something. I think it goes a long way.
And probably one of the most natural questions here would be, how do you be patient without gobs of money in the bank and needing work? Like, how do you balance that? Okay, I got to take a deep breath. Yeah. I know this is going to come. I'm putting the work in, so I know this is going to happen. It's not, I'm not a millionaire right off the bat, but it's going to happen. How do you balance that?
Yeah. So I think, while you're developing that patience, if you're really doing it, if you're really hyper focused and know what you want to do, you're going to start working hard at whatever it is, whether probably at the time, no one will notice what you're doing, but yourself that you're hyper focused and you're working hard. That's also, you're going to develop a confidence, and I think over time, I think back, I developed in my head, I would think, when it wasn't working or something, I would be like, there's no way I'm going to stop doing this. I was 100% committed to it. And I don't know why I was confident like that, because, I remember if I thought even deeper into it, I'd be like, wow, I really have nothing here right now. There's no checks coming in, with any brand logos or anything like that on them. So I think you have to develop that patience and then work and, find that confidence in yourself to tell yourself that it's going to work out no matter what. So, when there's not money coming in, those are always the hardest parts, or those dry periods you get. Any freelancer goes through that. But I think it's how you deal with those dry periods.
The mental state, the perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think I tell it all the time. And I'm sure, you do too. It's the mental game, I feel like, is almost more than the photography sometimes. You're really battling yourself there.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even today, I'm thinking through how I approach my day and how I approach my personal life and business and the way that I'm working and realizing the significance of the mental game. One of the things that I've found personally a lot of benefit from when I've done it is meditation. And, that ability to be able to be present and not worried about, I actually just posted a quote on my Instagram stories just a couple of days ago about how there is stress that comes from worrying about the past, anxiety that comes from worrying about the future, and peace comes from being in the present. I think this was from Lao Tzu or somebody like that said this.
That's really good.
But there's something about that ability to be present and not anxious. So many photographers I see talking about this thing of dealing with anxiety. And a lot of that anxiety comes from not being able to truly be present, and learning how to practice that consistently is really important. It's something I want to do even better with, because if we are in the right mental state, then we can handle some of the temporary stress that comes with running a business or trying to start a business. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us. Talk to us about time a little bit. I mean, I know that you're trying to launch your career, so you're probably putting a lot of hours in. How do you balance doing that with also not getting burnt out in the process? Do you carve a bit of time out for yourself on a daily or weekly basis?
Yeah, it's definitely something, honestly, from listening to your podcast, I know you guys, it's always a touch point, and I've taken little tidbits away from certain episodes that, strike me different. But yeah, right now it's a lot of hours, and it's more than it definitely, I want it to be maybe in the future. But there's little things like, one, I know a couple people have said in the past on your podcast, they, kind of end work around like that 6 p.m. time, and kind of like when a traditional, work environment would end. And my girlfriend works from home actually, and she's on a 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. work schedule. So I've kind of been trying to close my computer around that same time that she does.
Cool.
And that has helped a lot, definitely. And there's always, if I have time, I'll try and take an hour, and I'll honestly there's one thing I can definitely do where I won't think about work at all, and I can jump on a video game and I will be in a really good mental state. I won't think about work at all.
Yeah, I love it.
Do that for an hour. Yeah. So if I can do that, I try to when I can.
Do you have a video game of choice?
I would say, so I have the little Nintendo Switch.
Yes.
And I will take that everywhere with me, and I'll either play Rocket League or Skyrim. But those are good because I can play them, you don't have to have internet, so you can kind of play them wherever. Yeah,
that's a funny thing. I don't want to go too much on a tangent here, but it's a funny thing about games these days. I've been highly disappointed when I download a mobile game for my phone, and then I'm on the plane or something like that. I have a bit of extra time, or I want to do something besides work, and I go to play that game, and it's like no internet connection. I'm like, dude, come on, this is like what happened to games that you can play just any and everywhere? But I get it. That being said, there is something to there's some significance to being able to have an activity that you can go to that takes you away from. I mean, it doesn't have to be work, anything really. It's something that encourages you to be present and focused. A video game is immersive as they can be these days, can certainly do that. I personally find an outlet in riding a motorcycle that, I mean, if I'm not focused, if I'm not present, that's going to bite me in a pretty significant way. Right. And I think it's great for all of us to have activities that encourage us to be present, also at peace simultaneously, and just to kind of take 100%. A break. So you kind of break up the monotony, you minimize the potential for burnout. I think that's a really good thing, and we should all find those outlets. And then blocking off that time, also really important. And I have a lot of respect for the fact that you're already making that a priority for the sake of your relationship with your girlfriend. I think that's really cool too. Talk to me about a self-help book or a business book, maybe that you've read or listened to that's had a big impact on your life, maybe your business as well.
Yeah, so I would say maybe it's not necessarily self-help, but one of the best ones I've read most recently is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight.
Really? Okay.
So it's kind of how he got started with Nike and how it came about. His whole story is just super inspiring. He just put everything. Like if you asked him that question about one tip to utilize time for himself or others, there was a time where he didn't have an answer for you, Sure. Just reading that, seeing how he operated was pretty amazing. So that was a big one for me and it's also related to the footwear industry. Another one was This Is Not a T-Shirt by Bobby Hundreds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that one just came out recently. I read it. It's kind of how he's been in the streetwear apparel industry for 15 something years now, which is hard to do. So it talks about his journey. So those were two really good ones. And then obviously I listened to How I Built This with Guy Raz was really good.
It's such a good one.
I love that.
Do you have a favorite episode?
I really enjoyed Airbnb. I really liked WeWork as well, actually, how they went into this office space and started doing the construction themselves. Yeah. So yeah, those were great. Even Starbucks. There's so many good ones.
It is a really inspiring podcast.
It is. It's amazing.
The one around Southwest I thought was entertaining and interesting.
Yes, definitely.
Tom's Shoes was another really interesting episode. Yeah, for those of you listening in, if you do not listen to How I Built This.
Yeah, just How I Built This.
How I Built This, with Guy Raz. This is definitely an inspiring podcast that I would encourage everybody to listen to. It can be somewhat entertaining because it's conversational, but there's so much to take away as far as inspiration and even approach to running or starting a business. And I think we could all stand to, entertainment's important, but I think even myself, I tend to want to just kind of take a break. And so I just consume stuff that ultimately really isn't doing me a whole lot of good. And this podcast can be both entertaining and inspirational and educational. And it's a great recommendation. So we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes for anybody that's curious. Again, bokehpodcast.com is a great resource for links that we discuss during the podcast episode, talking points as well. If you're not taking advantage of the show notes, make sure you do that. I want to jump back to one other point that has come up multiple times now, Vince, which is the significance of putting the work in, especially when you're starting something up. You talked about Phil Knight, yourself as well, at how, especially when you're trying to start something, when you're trying to get it going, you're going to put extra hours in. And I used to be a lot more black and white about this. And I think ultimately I paid for it. When I started Photographer's Edit, my goal was to create a company that would generate passive income for me. And genuinely, within the span of probably 3 or 4 years, maybe, I was working as little as 3 or 4 hours a week. And I was lucky enough to have a really great team that was doing the work behind the scenes and getting the stuff done for me. But the flip side of that is that I know that even if I had put in, say, like 15 hours a week, which would not be a big deal in the least,
right,
that my company might be in a different place now.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Another thing is right now, I'm actually in the process of launching a new brand called Milu. And we're in app development, and it's a new experience for me. It's been a learning experience, certainly. And the reality is, in order to get something off the ground like that and trying to oversee a project, manage a project, and work with a team, you may just have to put in the extra hours. And so I understand that occasionally there may be phases that we go through where we're putting in the extra hours. As long as we're proactive and communicating with the significant people in our life, creating the expectation that, look, this is not going to be a forever thing. I'm putting some extra time in and effort and energy in right now. I know that we're not getting as much time together. I'm thinking about my kids here, maybe my girlfriend.
Yeah.
But those kinds of conversations are really important. And likely they're going to be understanding, especially as if you follow through then and cut back on the amount of hours later on when you can. But occasionally there are going to be those spurts of time where we do put the extra hours in. That's okay, as long as overall, big picture, we're making time for our own personal, mental, and physical health, as well as the important relationships in our life. And I think it's important to mention that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk to me about one of the most unusual items in your camera bag. This is kind of an interesting one, especially being a little bit different type of photographer that we don't normally have on the podcast. What comes to mind for you?
It is fishing wire. I knew that was going to be...
Really?
Yes. So every once in a while, I try and use it sparingly. If it's a shoe, there's actually sometimes where a brand will send me, it's supposed to be a pair of shoes, but it's a sample. So they only get the left pair made, or just the right.
Oh, okay.
And so you have to shoot it by itself. And there's even been times where you're supposed to show, that one shoe and make it look like there's two on the person's foot, but you really only have that one right shoe to work with.
Interesting.
Yeah. But when they want it off foot, sometimes I'll pull it out, and I can send you a couple of pictures where I've used it, but you kind of loop it through a certain way. And I had to get one of the fishing wires that kind of has a better weight to it, because some of the shoes are heavier, so it won't snap. And then you kind of, I either hold it out or have somebody hold it out, or, depending on what the situation is, and then go in and post and take the fishing wire out, and it kind of like makes the shoe look like it's floating. That's cool. And you can kind of, so it's always in my bag. That with like a little knife thing that doesn't get taken by TSA.
That's interesting. Actually, this is a relevant recommendation for wedding photographers, portrait photographers too, because I'm sure there are a lot of situations. In fact, I think about the detail shots for wedding photographers. Yeah. A lot of times it just all are the same. Everybody's doing the exact same thing. And I realize in some cases you have limited opportunities as far as the environment is concerned, but I bet you could create some really interesting pictures with floating details, if you will, using that fishing wire. That's a really cool idea. Yeah, cool. I love it. It comes in handy when you're least expecting it. Someone's like, man, I wish we could make this float or something. And I'm like, I got you. That's cool. Well, again, for those of you listening in, make sure you go check out Vince's work, particularly on Instagram. If you go to Vince, Vince, Sirico, Sirico, on Instagram. Of course, we'll link to that in the show notes as well. But let's talk about your photography, Vince. And before we get into your career path, just briefly, I know I alluded earlier to your use of color. When you and I were having conversation leading up to this interview, you'd sent me a link to a gallery that of images that you had recently finished. And the way that you were connecting the color of the shoe with colors in the environment was really quite interesting. It was really beautifully done. How do you go about planning for this approach? And did you find inspiration for this approach, or was it something you kind of came up with on your own? Yeah, I think it's a mix of things. Definitely inspiration early on. I think when Instagram was really getting started, there was one photographer in particular who goes by the name Trashhand. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's from Chicago, and that's originally where I kind of started this whole thing. I went to school and everything. So I kind of watched him take off, and I watched his photography, and it's very much cityscapes and landscapes, architecture, things like that. And like his use of color always was the best to me, even still to this day, just one of those people who really has it dialed in. And what was their name again? Trashhand. So it's just trash. Yeah. So trash and then hand. Yep. And it just no spaces. Interesting. Okay, we'll find that link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
But please continue.
Yeah. So he was somebody early on too that, that was really inspiring. And just to see the way how he was one of the first people to be featured by the Instagram actual page. And I was really noticing how Instagram was almost like a potential career, with photography. So it was just inspiring to watch that whole thing. And even, early on when I knew I wanted to do shoes, there wasn't a whole lot of shoe photography out there. One of the early brands, a shoe retailer named Kith, which is pretty big now. They started in New York. They had a shoe photographer in-house who did something very similar where he was matching environmental colors to shoes and things like that. And I think that really stuck with me. His name was Tyler Mansour, and he's still at Kith, and he's still one of their photographers. So those were some early inspirations, like some of the biggest for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually on Trash Hands Instagram at the moment, just kind of scrolling through as you're talking, and wow. I mean, just stunning scenic work, first of all. And then the way that he ties his subjects and photographs of shoes into those environments is, wow. It's really, really beautiful.
And that's actually another thing too. If you do a deep dive there, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, he also is not big on copy. His work is just there. It's very in your face, he's just showing you what you'll get kind of. So he's definitely been my biggest inspiration for getting started and still is today.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So how do you like take these ideas of mixing in color of the shoe and the environment into the shoot itself? I mean, are you able to kind of plan that in advance? Do you know the locations that you're shooting ahead of time? What does that look like?
Yes. So not really, unfortunately. It's a lot of, I'll get a shoe, and I think it's almost a subconscious thing now where I'm looking for the shoe to match a background, and I just go on these walks with the product. And being in New York, I think I'm super lucky. And even being in Chicago before this, two big cities, kind of endless alleys and streets you can turn down. And I'll just walk until I find something that stands out to me. And I always end up finding something because I know I can't go home until I do. While I'm doing those walks, I'm also finding other walls that will work for other shoes, and I'll kind of write them down or screenshot where I'm at on Google Maps or something.
Cool.
And kind of keep a little archive there of things. But, sometimes I get a shoe in and I know what it is, and my girlfriend will see it, and she'll even text me while she's out with her friends, "Hey, this wall is blue."
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So it's kind of that it plays a big role in it too. But, being somewhere like New York, I can just go out, and same with that project I sent you. We just went out, we kind of kept it within a certain square radius and walked around until something stood out to us. So, I've definitely told myself in the past, location scouting would be helpful, going out a day early, but sometimes there's some super quick turnaround times where, location scouting isn't in the process, or we don't have time for that. So yeah, just going out and finding places. It's one of my favorite things.
Well, again, the work speaks for itself, and
Thank you.
The way that you use those backgrounds, the environments, is incredible. The color. I mean, I'm scrolling through your Instagram account here, and even this simple shot that you posted back. This is November 30th of 2017, but it's a picture of some, I guess you could say, teal blue Nikes on a teal chair. And
oh yeah.
And the way that the colors tie together. I mean, it's such a simple shot. It's so beautiful, and it's very impactful in and of itself. And I can imagine that you can find opportunities like that are somewhat surprising, in some cases simple, but do the job of tying the colors together like that.
Yeah. And for that case, we were in a little studio space, and that chair was just there. And I had this pair of shoes that matched it.
Yeah.
So it's really just, right place, right time kind of thing sometimes.
That's cool.
But well, thank you.
No, absolutely. Well, let's actually talk about your career a little bit, because I want, on a very practical level, to share with our listeners how, I mean, again, this is a genre we don't normally delve into, but if there's an interest, especially for newer photographers, and they're trying to figure out which direction to take their career, this is a really exciting one, very interesting one, but I want to give them some context to how to approach the process of getting started in apparel photography, more specifically shoe photography. And by the way, I have to ask, is there a term or a phrase that's used to describe this type of photography? Am I labeling it correctly?
No, you know what? No, I don't think so.
Okay.
You got it. You're
okay.
Good.
All right. So we'll just call it shoe photography. But you moved to, as I alluded to earlier, to New York right after school.
Yeah.
Whereabouts did you go to school?
I went to school for the first year and a half. I went to Columbia, which is an art school in Chicago.
Yeah.
So kind of some full backstory on that was it was, senior year of high school. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And that was driving me crazy. I was up all night. I was on YouTube, Google, all this stuff, trying to figure it out. And so I ended up just kind of settling, and I was I'm going to go to a state school in Indiana, and I was going to go be an ear doctor randomly. I thought my parents would be happy. I would have like a doctor title in my name. And I was going to go room with my best friend, who I'm still close with today. And I actually went to orientation and everything. I had my student ID card, and this is, 2 months before you're supposed to go to college. And one of your parents has to come with you. And so we went, and I remember just coming home, and I remember my mom being like, "Why were you miserable? Like, you should be excited." And I didn't think she realized that I was like miserable there. I wasn't like, I was like stomping my feet or anything.
Sure.
She just like read me. And so I was just like, yeah. And her and my dad sat me down, and I was like, yeah, I want to like be in the footwear industry. And they were like, well, what is that? And
what is that?
Yeah, exactly. And I even was like, there was people at the time that I was starting to see where it was a viable career, whether it was design or owning your own store, just being around that product. And I was getting to the point where I was finding some of these people at Nike that were behind certain shoes that I really loved, that were like the designers, and trying to figure out their career path and everything. And I really thought I could do it or do something similar. And so I talked with my parents, and I was like, I think it'd be better if I went to a city, a big city, where I could have a chance to at least get my foot in somewhat of an industry. Because there's no footwear or fashion industry in Indiana, especially in Muncie specifically, where I was going to be. And so they were like, well, you can, go to school in Chicago, and you'd have to look. And Columbia had open admission. So they basically take people like me who can't make up their mind like last minute. So I went ahead and applied, and a couple weeks later I got accepted, and couldn't afford student housing there. So that was a big thing. That was almost going to be like a second tuition if I did student housing in downtown Chicago. And my grandmother was by herself at the time in Chicago, in a building that she lived in for, most of her life. And so she welcomed me into her apartment. And that's where I kind of got started and went to school. And those first 2 years was really, honestly, it was just me doing sneaker stuff. I had no friends. I think I got one person's phone number in my phone my first year and a half of school. And art school just wasn't working out. I was very much on the verge of kind of giving up and trying to go back to a state school and get a normal job. And then I took that photography class, and things started working out for me. So yeah, that's kind of how it all got started.
Well, you talk about those first 2 years that you were just kind of in your own world. I mean, there had to be, as much as you were just not feeling it going after a medical career, it had to be a pretty big shift going from that to, okay, now I get to go to school for the thing that I really am stoked about.
Yeah. It was so exciting.
What did that look like? When you talk about just doing shoes, was it kind of learning the field, learning the industry? What do you mean by just kind of being in that world so focused?
Right. So freshman year of college, I still hadn't picked up a camera. So it was just me thinking I was going to be a designer, or I was even thinking I could work on like the materials that go on a shoe, or the certain colors, and get into the whole like Pantone swatch, and how some of these brands, they tell a story on a shoe. And that was like fascinating to me. And so I was just learning about that. And there was sneaker blogs, websites, even publications. One in particular is called Sneaker Freaker. And they're still around today. They've been around for a long time, before I was even into shoes. And they've been making these mini books that come out, every few months. And it's just a full deep dive into everything that's going on in the sneaker world. So it covers every brand. They're not biased by any means. And they talk about the designers, and they'll like feature a collector. They go all around the world. They're based in Australia. So basically they have to go everywhere else for all of their content. So I was reading things like that. I was just fully immersed myself. That's where I kind of learned, I didn't realize I was taking in all this knowledge, but it was just me learning everything I could about shoes, the history, and, Michael Jordan and Tinker Hatfield, who designed all of Michael Jordan's shoes. It just went on. And I was just on my computer every night doing that, just looking up. There'd be a random YouTube video that I'd get lucky. I'd find something I hadn't seen, or, I'd find a different article from like a Complex. They were doing a lot of sneaker related stuff at the time too. And the more and more I've seen that, I just realized that this was definitely a career. But the frustrating part was that there was just no specific path of doing it. There's no footwear. It's funny because you think everyone is wearing sneakers. If you're leaving the house, you're putting on a pair of shoes, but there's really not a set educational degree for it to get into that industry. So I was just so frustrated. I felt like I was running up a wall trying to figure it out. But it was really from me just posting photos on Instagram of shoes and stuff, as I met this community of people that had similar interests in footwear, and some of them were already working in the industry, and I just wanted to be in that industry so bad. I remember more than anything.
Well, I think this is a good segue too, because I really want to make this, and you probably know this from listening to the podcast, our listeners, regular listeners know this. I think it's really important that our listeners are walking away with something practical and actionable when it comes to our main topic of focus. And so when you talk about what you did, and I mean, the very simple fact that there was no obvious pathway to take, you had to make this happen yourself. And so maybe you're going to be one of the first to really put it out there for the photography world, the photography industry. How did you make that happen? Because again, you've only been photographing for a few years. You barely have even alluded to your photography training. Somehow you managed to pick that up really, really quickly as well, which is really probably a conversation in and of itself. But I want to help photographers, up and coming photographers who want to get into this industry know how to make that happen. You're already working with companies like Reebok and Adidas, which is massive. So very simply, what are the top 3 principles that have enabled you to move so quickly in this direction, to be able to make these big connections and to begin to develop a career?
Yeah. So I would say, let's say if this person's already decided they want to do footwear photography, one thing they can do is absolutely message me. That's one thing I want to let any of them know, is that they can ask a million questions, and I'll try and help them as much as possible. But don't stray from it. There's going to be a lot of times where you're probably going to doubt yourself, and, obviously don't want to stray from it. But there's also a lot of other avenues you can do with photography, whether it's cars or landscape and music. And all of those can be very enticing, but they're also going to take away time from you really just trying to hone in on that craft. So whether it's going into your own personal sneaker collection or texting a friend that has some sneakers, just go out for a day and just go take photos. And, if you're proud of them, post them on Instagram. It can't hurt to put them out there, and just continually do that. You really have to, I would say, if you could stick to something like that and consistently shoot it and notice that you're getting better and put it out there in the world, you're going to see things change for you in a couple years. I can almost guarantee that for any route. I think we all could, say that if you just stick to something. So I think that's the first principle.
Don't give up. Just keep pushing forward.
Don't give up and stay in that. I think you did it with, I just listened to your podcast with Vicky. It was a stay in your lane.
Yeah.
That's 4 words right there. I think every photographer should have that, kind of ingrained.
Well, and I have to say here too that I've got a lot of respect for the amount of focus that you have. I mean, it's you're walking in. First, you're in New York City, in Manhattan. That is, I mean, almost disturbing enough, right? I mean, it's overwhelming. There's so much going on, and you're doing this right after coming out of school, and then you're like, you know what? I'm going to make this thing happen. I'm going to make this career happen. This is what I'm going to do. This is the lane that I'm going to run in. And your level of focus is extremely admirable. Is that something that you feel like your parents taught you? Is it something you've just kind of learned along the way? Where do you get that?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. My dad has worked in the same place for 20 years and works the craziest hours at a convention center in Chicago at the McCormick Place. And I do think I definitely get, and even from my mom, because, they both do have a very, very good work ethic. And I think it has to have came from them, and I really can't pinpoint what exactly it was, but like another thing that, I was watching that I wanted to bring up with this principle was this Kendrick Lamar interview that I'll have to send you. And it's older. I think it's like 5 years old. And it's actually him doing a fashion interview. And, that's obviously not his focus. He's very much a musician.
Sure.
But they talk about that. So they say, what is like your take on doing, clothing or apparel? And he said, my heart isn't in that. My heart is in the music. And, if my heart ever goes to fashion, I'll do that. But, I would never, just because I have the money or the opportunity to go do that, but I just do that and take it away from someone else's profession. And that's kind of how I look at it. I'm intrigued. I really do like shooting concerts and stuff. And, maybe it's cars or something else, or in sports too. I love shooting sports, but my heart is really in, and always has been, in kind of, footwear. And until my heart goes somewhere else, I'll go do those other things. But right now, yeah, that's where it is. And I think I remember like that one stuck with me, that interview, because I remember I found it yesterday actually, because I wanted to bring it up again. I think that's a good way to approach photography.
Yeah, absolutely. The significance of commitment comes to mind here. And I mean, this is a very personal thing as well, or something that I can relate to, because I know that I'm an extremely emotional person, and I'm also a very curious person. So like the next shiny thing is getting my attention, whether it's a different totally. Motorcycle, or maybe, some other project or activity to pursue, or the next coolest, whatever. It's easy to be distracted, but there is something to be said for commitment in a world and in a culture where we have so many choices. Right. I have a lot of respect, not only for your focus, but also what you were saying that Kendrick was pointing out, which is significance of staying in that lane, committing to that thing. And this might be great, but this is what I'm doing right now. And not only committing to that, but committing to that for a period of time. You alluded earlier to the significance of patience. And, again, because we live in such a, for lack of a better word, luxurious first world culture, it's easy to, with all the choices out there, to be like, all right, I'm going to try this now, and I'm going to do that thing, and I'm going to go after that, rather than actually committing and putting your head down and digging in and making this thing happen. And there's a lot to be said to that. So much respect to you, and I appreciate that point of advice and reminder for all of us. So the first principle is not to stray. Don't give up. Stay in your lane. Yes. That's really important. Take us to the next principle.
Yeah, I think the next one, I had just to have that confidence. But again, I think it comes from putting in that work, so there's going to be a period of time where, no one is maybe noticing what you're doing. It's really just you and your camera, and that period of time, you won't realize it while you're doing it. You'll probably think you're not going anywhere because there's no checks coming in, but I think it's the most important period of time, because you're going through that hard time that no one else is going through, like that experience is going to be your own forever. And through that, you're going to get this confidence to go ahead and tackle freelance or any sort of photography. It's a lifelong lesson. There's still feel like there's menu options in my camera that I still don't know what they do.
That's fair. I'd say probably about 80% of the options that are in cameras right now, we don't actually need anyway. So I don't think it's hurting you too much.
Yeah, like the Sony menu option I have, it's like a yellow pages, it looks like in there. It's insane. Learning, just little things like that. When you learn about your camera, and if you have something, I think I am fortunate enough to where I did have a passion for sneakers, because it makes it easier for me with photography, because I know that's what I want to shoot. I think there are some people who love photography, and I'll get messages. They often don't know what they want to shoot, with their career. And I just, encourage them to try and find something that stands out to them the most, whether it's portraits, and people, and if it's weddings, just find where your heart is in it. And then if you shoot it over that period of time, you'll develop this confidence that you're going to be able to do it forever. I remember giving my mom such a hard time in high school when I had a high school job, or even college early on. I had jobs, like regular jobs. I'd just be like, when I graduate, I'm never going to clock in somewhere, and I'm not going to have a boss. And part of me said it I think it was just maybe to upset her because she did not like hearing that. But I think also there was something in me, I remember thinking, too, was I actually believed in that. Yep. I was like, I'm going to somehow make something happen for myself where I can just be my own boss and, work when I want to and just enjoy life. I was really big on that. And when I really thought about it, I didn't know what that was, but I was just confident it was going to happen. So I think they're confident about something. Maybe they don't even realize it, So just exploring yourself like that is so important.
Well, the note that I made as you were talking was confidence.
Yes.
From putting in the work. And the from putting in the work piece is, I think, really important here because, again, in a culture where, I mean, sure, some of us as we're launching a business, we may be kind of scraping. There's not a lot of money in the bank. We got to make something happen. We got to shoot something, or we're not going to have, we're not going to be able to pay bills. But aside from that, we can't just expect to sit around and something happen.
Yeah.
So there is, I mean, as obvious as it may seem, there is significance in this idea of putting in the work. Just saying, I know this is going to work, or I know I'm going to make this happen. This is going to be my career. I'm going to be big, or whatever the thing is. This is what I'm going to do, but not actually be willing to put the effort and the time and the energy into it. We're going to miss out likely on at least as good an opportunity, if not the opportunity at all, to be involved in that field or in that project or in that kind of long-term dream. And so you're putting the work in, and doing the research and practicing so that when you get that opportunity, you can actually capitalize on that opportunity. And that's really, really important and a great reminder for all of us. So the first principle, don't stray, keep focused. Number 2, confidence from putting in the work. And what is the third principle that comes to mind?
Yeah, and the third one I think is to pay it forward. So for me, what really kind of gave me a big thing that gave me confidence and that I'll never forget was when I was posting all of these shoe photos on Instagram. I didn't know if really anyone was noticing, but I had like this small network of people that I met, via the internet, but I remember I was sitting in photography class. I remember I got a mention on Twitter, like my phone went off. And Complex at the time was doing these internet lists, so it was like top 10 of this, like top 10 people in this. And they did a list where it was top 20 sneaker photographers you need to follow. And I was one of them. I was on this list. Yeah. And this was my sophomore year of college. This is right when I was trying to figure things out kind of thing. And I was just blown away. But these two guys, Nick Engvall and Brandon Edler, were at Complex, and I knew of them, and they're kind of been in the industry their whole life. These are people that I wanted to be like, I wanted to be in the industry with them, and they wrote this article and included me in it, and that like meant the world to me, and even to this day, I still don't know what they seen in me to include me in that list. And it was such a niche article. I don't even know if you could have found 20 sneaker photographers at the time on Instagram, but it meant a lot to me. And from there, both of those guys, they went on to Finish Line, and they gave me my first paid gig ever with Finish Line. And, they've branched off and, done so much. And I'm still working with Finish Line today, actually, 5 years later.
Wow.
So yeah, so seeing how they're like, some of the most selfless people, and other people that are in the industry, the people at Adidas and Reebok, they're just selfless. Like they look out for me and will get me a project, because they think I can totally tackle it. And if I can just do that for someone, that would, mean the world to me, because I know how much it helped me and gave me confidence. So if it's whether someone's messaging me or, if I can go talk to somebody, I think that's such a big thing that, we could all do, is there's somebody trying to figure it out there, that could use some help.
That's amazing. Well, I love the energy that comes from that principle. I mean, this is huge. And we are talking, I love principles, and I don't think like it's a subjective thing here. I think objectively understanding the significance of principles when it comes to living our personal and our business life is really important as a foundation. And then we can get into some of the nitty gritty and the details and the how-tos and the technical this and that. But having a baseline of principles to base our actions on, I think is really important. And we talk about the significance of focusing, not straying, confidence that comes from putting in the work, and then the significance of paying it forward, or just very simply kindness, right? And being a good person to the people around you, not only in the way that you generally interact with them, but in an effort to also help them, to give to them, to the community that you're involved in. You never know where that may come back and pay off in a way that's probably unexpected, as you're pointing out, Vince. And I think this is a wonderful, wonderful reminder of that. By the way, for those of you listening in who aren't familiar with a Complex brand, I mean, you're talking about a massive brand in the pop culture world, particularly in regards to apparel and more specifically shoes. I'm subscribed to Complex on YouTube, and a video that I'll watch pretty regularly is the celebrities going sneaker shopping. I feel like I'm able to kind of keep up with pop culture a little bit by chiming in on those at least occasionally. But that is massive that you got that kind of recognition. And then, I mean, kind of getting to some of the details, would you say that recognition by Complex was ultimately what allowed you to be able to make the connections with like Reebok and Adidas? What led to those? Okay.
That was one of probably one of the biggest factors in it. So after that, obviously I was able to get in touch with these two guys, and they were believers in my work. And not long after that, they both, like I said, went to Finish Line, and they kind of changed things over at Finish Line. Finish Line was very much a traditional brand in the mall.
Yeah.
They didn't really have a social presence. And, now they do. And now it's, Brandon and Nick, I mean, they created this program. They're a big part of this program where Finish Line has photographers in key cities. So, New York and LA and Chicago, and there's someone in Texas and all of that. And they send us product monthly, and we shoot it, for their social. And there's countless projects before that too, that, Finish Line that, Brandon and Nick have gone out of their way to give just to me,
Wow.
Because they believe that I could do it. And I've met people, someone from Finish Line who then went on to work at Adidas basketball. And, from there it spiraled into, I was working with sneaker blogs, and we got to do a lot of first James Harden basketball shoe. And that led to, a lot of the sports categories I'm working with today. And it's just this like tight kind of it's not really tight knit, but it's just a circle of people, and everyone kind of looks out for everyone. And it's just, everyone's just is nice, it's so refreshing.
It's amazing how something simple as kindness can make such a big difference, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. It's wild, but that's one of my favorite things about being in this industry. Is even getting to go on these work trips, and they're there. It's get to hang out with my friends,
Yeah.
So that's, I can't ask for more than that.
Wow. Well, and honestly, I can't ask for much more than what you've shared today. This has been really, I love the conversation. I love what you represent. I love the principles you're sharing. And maybe just real quickly, one more time, if you'll share with our listeners where they can find you online and potentially message you as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's just my first and last name. So Vince Sirico. That's where you can find me on everything: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and same with my website. And yeah, if you have any questions, please message away. I have no problem, responding.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Vince. Thanks for making time for Bokeh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Milu, the simplest way for photographers and coordinators to collaborate on shot lists and timelines for weddings, parties, and other amazing events. Visit Milu, MIILU.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Photographer's Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.